4,000 years. That's how long the Jewish story has been unfolding. 4,000 years of survival against impossible odds, of exile and return, of destruction and rebuilding, of being scattered across every continent on earth, and somehow, impossibly, remaining one people. In 2026, there are roughly 15 million Jews in the world. That's 0.2% of the global population. 15 million people carrying forward a tradition that predates almost every other civilization still in existence. The ancient Egyptians are gone. The Babylonians are gone. The Roman Empire is dust. But the Jews are still here. How? That's the question that's haunted historians for centuries. How does a people survive being conquered by every major empire in history? How do you maintain an identity when you're dispersed across 70 different countries for 2,000 years? How do you rebuild after watching your holiest city burn to the ground not once, but twice? The Jewish story is not a story of military conquest or territorial expansion. It's a story of something more fundamental. It's a story of memory, of law, of text, of choosing again and again across 4 millennia to remain Jewish even when assimilation or conversion would have been easier, safer, more rational. This is the entire history of the Jewish people. 4,000 years compressed into one telling. And I'm warning you now, it's not a comfortable story. It's a story of resilience, yes, but also of catastrophic loss, of communities that thrived for centuries and then vanished in a single generation, of empires that tried to erase the Jewish people from history and failed, but not before killing millions in the attempt. Let's begin where it begins. Not in Israel, but in Mesopotamia, in a city called around 1800 BCE, with a man named Abraham. The Jewish story starts with a promise. God speaks to Abraham, a man living in in what is now Iraq, and tells him to leave everything he knows, his home, his family, his people. In exchange, God promises Abraham 3 things: land, descendants, and a special relationship. This promise, this covenant, becomes the foundation of everything that follows. Abraham's grandson, Jacob, has 12 sons. These 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. The family grows. But then famine hits Canaan, the land Abraham was promised, and the family migrates to Egypt, where there's food. For generations, they live in Egypt. They prosper. And then, according to the biblical account, a new pharaoh comes to power who doesn't remember Joseph, the Israelite who saved Egypt from starvation. This pharaoh sees the growing Israelite population as a threat, so he enslaves them. You get absorbed into the conquering empire within a generation or two. But it doesn't happen. Why? Because of what the exiled Jews do in Babylon. They can't worship at the temple because the temple is destroyed, so they create something new. They gather in small groups to read and study the Torah. They develop liturgy prayers that can be said anywhere, not just at the temple. They create what will eventually become the synagogue. This is revolutionary. For the first time in human history, a religion exists independent of a specific place. You don't need the temple. You don't need Jerusalem. You don't even need the land of Israel. All you need is the text and a community. In 539 BCE, the Persian Empire conquers Babylon. The Persian king, Cyrus, issues a decree, allowing the Jews to return to Judah and rebuild their temple. Some go back, many don't. This is the beginning of the Jewish diaspora communities of Jews living outside the land of Israel by choice, not just because of exile. The Second Temple is completed in 516 BCE. It's not as grand as Solomon's temple, but it's a center of worship again. Judah becomes a Persian province, then a Greek province after Alexander the Great conquers the region in 333 BCE. Under Greek rule, there's pressure to assimilate, to adopt Greek culture, Greek language, Greek religion. Some Jews resist. In 167 BCE, a family called the Maccabees leads a revolt against the Seleucid Greeks, who are trying to force Hellenization. The revolt succeeds. For about 80 years, Judah is independent again under the Hasmonean dynasty. But in 63 BCE, the Romans arrive. Judah becomes a Roman province. The Romans allow local rulers, the Herodian dynasty, to govern, but ultimate power rests with Rome. Taxes flow to Rome. Roman soldiers patrol the streets, and when there's resistance, Rome responds with overwhelming force. In 66 CE, the Jews revolt against Roman rule. It's a disaster. The Romans besiege Jerusalem. In 70 CE, they breach the walls. They burn the Second Temple. They slaughter thousands. The historian Josephus, who witnessed it, estimates that over 1 million Jews died during the siege and the subsequent fighting. The temple is gone. Jerusalem is in ruins, but the Romans aren't finished. In 132 CE, another revolt breaks out, led by Simon Bar Kokhba. The Romans crush it. They kill an estimated 580,000 Jews. They rename Judea Syria Palestina to erase the Jewish connection to the land. They ban Jews from entering Jerusalem except on one day a year. This should be the end. 2 temple destructions, 2 catastrophic defeats. Most of the population killed or enslaved. The survivors scattered across the Roman Empire. You get absorbed into the conquering empire within a generation or two. But it doesn't happen. Why? Because of what the exiled Jews do in Babylon. They can't worship at the temple because the temple is destroyed. So they create something new. They gather in small groups to read and study the Torah. They develop liturgy prayers that can be said anywhere, not just at the temple. They create what will eventually become the synagogue. This is revolutionary. For the first time in human history, a religion exists independent of a specific place. You don't need the temple. You don't need Jerusalem. You don't even need the land of Israel. All you need is the text and a community. In 539 BCE, the Persian Empire conquers Babylon. The Persian king, Cyrus, issues a decree allowing the Jews to return to Judah and rebuild their temple. Some go back, many don't. This is the beginning of the Jewish diaspora communities of Jews living outside the land of Israel by choice, not just because of exile. The Second Temple is completed in 516 BCE. It's not as grand as Solomon's temple, but it's a center of worship again. Judah becomes a Persian province, then a Greek province after Alexander the Great conquers the region in 333 BCE. Under Greek rule, there's pressure to assimilate, to adopt Greek culture, Greek language, Greek religion. Some Jews resist. In 167 BCE, a family called the Maccabees leads a revolt against the Seleucid Greeks, who are trying to force Hellenization. The revolt succeeds. For about 80 years, Judah is independent again under the Hasmonean dynasty. But in 63 BCE, the Romans arrive. Judah becomes a Roman province. The Romans allow local rulers, the Herodian dynasty, to govern, but ultimate power rests with Rome. Taxes flow to Rome. Roman soldiers patrol the streets, and when there's resistance, Rome responds with overwhelming force. In 66 CE, the Jews revolt against Roman rule. It's a disaster. The Romans besiege Jerusalem. In 70 CE, they breach the walls. They burn the Second Temple. They slaughter thousands. The historian Josephus, who witnessed it, estimates that over 1 million Jews died during the siege and the subsequent fighting. The temple is gone. Jerusalem is in ruins, but the Romans aren't finished. In 132 CE, another revolt breaks out, led by Simon Bar Kokhba. The Romans crush it. They kill an estimated 580,000 Jews. They rename Judea Syria Palestina to erase the Jewish connection to the land. They ban Jews from entering Jerusalem except on one day a year. This should be the end. 2 temple destructions, 2 catastrophic defeats. Most of the population killed or enslaved. The survivors scattered across the Roman Empire. But it's not the end, because the rabbis, the teachers, do what their ancestors did in Babylon. They preserve the tradition through text and law. They compile the Mishnah, a written collection of oral traditions and legal interpretations. Later, they'll add the Gemara, creating the Talmud, the central text of Rabbinic Judaism. You don't need the temple anymore. You have the law. You have the community. You have the memory. We're only at year 135, and already the Jewish people have survived more catastrophes than most civilizations ever face. If you want to see where this goes, subscribe now, because the next 2,000 years are even more intense. For the next 1,800 years, the Jewish story is primarily a diaspora story. Jews live as minorities in Christian Europe and the Islamic world. Sometimes they're tolerated, sometimes they're welcomed, often they're persecuted. Under early Islam, Jews are considered people of the book, protected but subordinate. They pay special taxes, they have restrictions on what jobs they can hold, what clothes they can wear. But they're allowed to practice their religion and maintain their communities. In places like Spain, Iraq, and Egypt, Jewish communities thrive. Scholars, poets, physicians. Maimonides, one of the greatest Jewish philosophers, lives in 12th century Egypt. Christian Europe is more volatile. The church teaches that Jews killed Christ, that they're cursed by God. This creates a theological justification for persecution. In 1096, the First Crusade begins. Crusaders, on their way to fight Muslims in the Holy Land, massacre Jewish communities in the Rhineland. Entire towns are wiped out. Survivors are forcibly converted or flee. In the 13th and 14th centuries, Jews are expelled from England, France, and parts of Germany. The pattern is similar each time. First, economic restrictions. Jews are banned from most professions. They're forced into money lending because Christians aren't allowed to charge interest to other Christians. Then, resentment builds. Jews are accused of usury, of exploiting Christians. Then comes violence, then expulsion. In 1348, the Black Death sweeps through Europe. Jews are blamed, accused of poisoning wells. Entire communities are burned alive. In Strasbourg, 2,000 Jews are killed in a single day. In 1492, Spain expels its entire Jewish population, about 200,000 people. This is catastrophic. Spanish Jews, called Sephardim, had been there for over 1,000 years. They'd built schools, synagogues, libraries. They'd produced some of the greatest Jewish scholars in history, and overnight they're told to convert to Christianity or leave. Many convert publicly, but continue practicing Judaism in secret. They're called conversos or marranos. They hide mezuzahs in walls. They keep kosher in secret. They light Shabbat candles in basements. And the Spanish Inquisition hunts them, tortures them, burns them at the stake if they're caught. In Eastern Europe, particularly Poland and Russia, large Jewish communities develop. By the 17th century, Poland has the largest Jewish population in the world. Jews live in shtetls, small towns with their own governance structures, schools, and courts. But in 1648, catastrophe strikes again. A Cossack uprising led by Bogdan Chmielnicki targets Jews across Ukraine and Poland. Over the course of several years, an estimated 100,000 Jews are killed. Entire communities are destroyed. It's called the Gzer's Tak Vetat, in Jewish memory, the Decree of 1648. The 18th and 19th centuries bring the Enlightenment and Jewish emancipation in Western Europe. For the first time, Jews are offered citizenship and civil rights in countries like France and Germany. Many Jews assimilate. They adopt the language, dress, and culture of their host countries. They become doctors, lawyers, professors. They think, finally, they can just be citizens like everyone else. But even emancipation has limits. In Russia, Jews are confined to the Pale of Settlement, a restricted area where they're allowed to live. Pogroms, organized massacres are common. In 1881, after the assassination of Tsar Alexander II, pogroms sweep through Russia. Jewish homes and businesses are destroyed. Women are raped. Men are killed. This triggers the Great Migration. Between 1880 and 1924, over 2 million Jews leave Eastern Europe for America. They're fleeing poverty and violence, looking for freedom. And in America, they find it not perfect. There's still anti-Semitism, still quotas at universities and country clubs, but nothing like Europe. Meanwhile, a new movement emerges: Zionism. The idea that Jews need their own state, their own sovereignty, to truly be safe. Theodor Herzl publishes The Jewish State in 1896. He argues that assimilation has failed, that Jews will never be fully accepted in Europe, that the only solution is a return to the land of Israel. Small groups of Jews begin immigrating to Palestine, which is then part of the Ottoman Empire. They buy land, they establish agricultural communities, they revive Hebrew as a spoken language for the first time in 2,000 years. And then comes the Holocaust. Between 1933 and 1945, Nazi Germany and its collaborators systematically murder 6 million Jews. That's roughly 40% of the world's Jewish population. Entire communities that had existed for 1,000 years are wiped out in a matter of months. The Jews of Poland, 3.3 million people, are reduced to fewer than 300,000. The Yiddish-speaking world of Eastern Europe, with its rich culture of literature, music, and religious scholarship, is destroyed so completely that within a generation, it exists only in memory. On May 14th, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declares the establishment of the State of Israel. For the first time in over 1,800 years, Jews have political sovereignty in their ancestral homeland. The next day, 5 Arab armies invade. Israel survives, barely. Over the next decades, Jews from across the diaspora immigrate to Israel. Holocaust survivors, Jews expelled from Arab countries, Ethiopian Jews, Russian Jews. Today, Israel has a population of about 9.7 million, roughly 7.2 million of them Jewish. But sovereignty hasn't meant safety. Israel has fought multiple wars. The Six-Day War in 1967, the Yom Kippur War in 1973, decades of conflict with Palestinians, terrorism, rocket attacks. And the existential question remains: can a Jewish state survive long-term in a region where it's surrounded by hostile neighbors? In 2026, that question is more urgent than ever. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas launched the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust, killing over 1,200 people in southern Israel and taking hundreds hostage. The trauma of that day rippled across the global Jewish community. It triggered a war in Gaza that's still shaping Israeli politics and society. And it sparked a massive surge in anti-Semitism, worldwide attacks on synagogues, Jewish schools, individuals attacked for wearing Stars of David. The response from the global Jewish community was both predictable and heartbreaking. Diaspora Jews, even those who'd been critical of Israeli policies, felt the old familiar fear. The sense that the world still isn't safe, that 4,000 years of survival doesn't guarantee 4001. And yet, Jews are still here. 15 million strong in Israel. In America, where 6 million Jews have built communities and institutions. In Europe, where small communities are rebuilding. In South America, Australia, South Africa, scattered across the world, connected by memory, text, tradition, and the stubborn refusal to disappear. 4,000 years in one telling. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is for. Hit that like button and subscribe, because we've got more deep histories like this coming. So here we are. 2026. 4,000 years from Abraham. 3,500 years from the Exodus. 2,000 years from the destruction of the Second Temple. 78 years from the founding of Israel. 3 years from October 7th. The question that's haunted Jewish history is still unanswered. How do you survive? Not just physically, though that's been hard enough. But how do you survive as a distinct people when you're dispersed across 70 countries? When you've been conquered by every major empire in history? When you've faced expulsion, forced conversion, massacre, and genocide? The answer, I think, is in what the Jews chose to carry with them. Not swords, not empires, not even land for most of their history. What they carried was text, Torah, Talmud, prayer, law, memory. When the Babylonians destroyed the first temple, the Jews didn't despair. They wrote down the oral traditions. When the Romans destroyed the second temple, the rabbis didn't give up. They created a portable religion that could exist anywhere there were 10 Jews and a Torah scroll. When medieval Europe expelled them, they took their books. When the Nazis tried to erase them, survivors rebuilt communities using memory and text. When Arab countries expelled their Jews after 1948, those refugees brought their traditions to Israel and recreated them. This is what makes Jewish survival unique. It's not about military power, it's about transmission. Parents teaching children, rabbis teaching students, communities preserving traditions, even when it would be easier, safer, more rational to let them go. But here's what keeps me up at night when I think about this history. The Jewish people have survived 4,000 years of catastrophe, but survival is not the same as thriving. And the cost of that survival has been staggering. 6 million in the Holocaust, hundreds of thousands in pogroms, entire communities destroyed in Spain, in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East. Languages lost, Ladino, Yiddish, Judeo-Arabic. Cultural traditions that will never be recovered because everyone who remembered them is dead. The Jewish people are still here. But they're also profoundly diminished from what they might have been without 4,000 years of persecution. We'll never know what Jewish civilization could have produced if it hadn't spent most of its energy just trying to survive. And in 2026, the threat hasn't disappeared. Anti-Semitism is rising globally, far-right movements in Europe and America are emboldened, Israel faces existential security threats. Assimilation in the diaspora means that many young Jews are choosing not to pass the tradition to the next generation. For 4,000 years, Jews chose to remain Jewish even when it was dangerous, even when it cost them everything. Will that continue? Can it continue? I don't know. Nobody does. But here's what I do know. For 4,000 years, every generation of Jews was certain they were living in the final chapter. The Babylonian exile, the Roman destruction, the Spanish expulsion, the pogroms, the Holocaust. Every generation was sure this was the end. And every generation was wrong. The Jews survived, not because of miracles, but because of choice. The choice to remember, to teach, to preserve, to remain. Whether that choice continues for another 4,000 years, that's up to the Jews of today and tomorrow, and every generation that comes after. The story isn't over. It's never over. That might be the most Jewish thing about Jewish history. The refusal to write the final chapter. The insistence that tomorrow might be different. That survival is possible. That hope, however battered and bruised, is still worth holding on to. 4,000 years and counting. So, what do you think? Will Jewish history continue for another 4,000 years? Or are we watching something fundamentally different unfold? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what you make of this story. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. We've got more deep histories coming. See you next time.